Welcome back. As Nigeria prepares for 2027 general elections, tensions have gotten higher with recent controversy over the Electoral Act amendment passed by the Senate on Wednesday. The Senate had come under fire for the rejection of the proposal to make the electronic transmission or e-transmission of election results from polling units to be to the Independent National Electoral Commission's result viewing portal IREV mandatory after vote counting. Senate President Godswill Akpabio attempted to clear the air on the matter, insisting that the amendment did not abolish electronic transmission, insisting that the Senate retained electronic transmission, which has been in the Act and was used in 2022. However, many lawyers and civil society organizations argue that the 2022 Act has been largely abused and that many Nigerians want electronic transmission of results made compulsory for election credibility real time.
Yesterday, opposition lawmakers in the National Assembly, including Senators Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan, Senator Ehilebo and Aminu Tambuwal, insisted that real-time electronic transmission of election results is still being retained in the amended electoral bill, providing clarification on the bill passed by the Senate on Wednesday. Senator Abaribe, speaking on behalf of Senator Akpoti-Uduaghan, Tambuwal and other opposition lawmakers stressed that the Senate did not pass electronic transfer of results as contained in the Electoral Act of 2022, but rather endorsed electronic transmission of results from polling units.
Before you are distinguished senators of the Federal Republic, and this is those who are among those who are very concerned about the reports in the media that we have all seen, and the media has been awash with it since yesterday. So we felt, those of us who are still around, that it would be necessary to make a clarification of what happened yesterday, to put the records straight. Yesterday, the Senate did not, I repeat, did not pass transfer of results, which was in the 2022 Act. What we passed, and which the Senate President himself, when he was doing a clarification sitting on his chair, is transmission of results. And I need to make this very clear. Every one of us who is a senator, who has the privilege to represent a senatorial district, came here under the trust of their senatorial zone. And each one of them imbues in himself or herself a public trust, a trust that has been handed to us by Nigerians to do the absolute best for Nigeria. And when it now appears that we have been misunderstood in any way, that's why we said we will come here, each and every one of us this morning, including those that are not here, a vast majority of the senators, to say that this is exactly the process that we passed through to get to this point. First, there was a joint committee of both the Senate and the House, made up of members of the electoral committees in both chambers. These joint committees had several retreats, both in Abuja and elsewhere. And each of those retreats was done with both INEC and the CSOs. Everyone agreed at the end of the retreat that electronic transmission of votes was the way to go. And that was reflected in the report both in the House and in the Senate. Now, there was public hearing, there was everything, and this was a what they will say sine qua non. Nothing else but that. And I think the Senate President reiterated it yesterday that the committee report was brought. The Senate also set up an ad hoc committee to review this report, electoral report, and report back to the House. And it was the report of that Senate, of that ad hoc committee led by Senator Adegbomire, that we considered when we went into a closed session. And the reason for us to go into a closed session was so that we can tidy up all the niggling things inside there. And when we now come back to plenary to pass it, that we will pass it without any rancor. I can assure you, on my honor and the honor of all of us who are standing here.
Well, that was quite a lengthy one. We hope to be able to dissect it. And joining us to discuss this seeming controversy is the Executive Director of Electoral College, Mr. Kunle Lawal. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning. Also joining us is lawyer and politician, Mr. Anthony Ehilebo. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with Mr. Lawal. I'm a bit confused as to what exactly is going on. They're saying that they didn't revert to the 2022 Act and that it's now transmission as opposed to transfer, which was the word used in the 2022 Act. But the question is, are we now able to do a transmission real time? Shouldn't that be the concern? Maybe you can help shed some more light from what you understand of the ongoing misunderstanding of what the electoral reforms are proposing.
Thank you very much. I think where the rancor or where everybody disagrees is that in the 2022 Electoral Act, the Electoral Act clearly states that the electoral body, which is of course INEC, has the mandate to choose the mode of transmission in which it transmits electoral results. And INEC, if you remember in 2022, made a social commitment to Nigerians and started to transfer results electronically. And for whatever reason or for INEC's reason, things happened in 2023. It didn't ensure automatic transmission of results. So most CSOs, most politicians, Nigerians generally have demanded that accountability cannot be placed in the hands of a probability. So the best thing will be for us to ensure that in law, it's no more INEC has the choice. It is INEC must transmit these results. This must be made clear, and how important this is because most of the manipulations, every mishap that goes on in elections is generally practiced or generally occurs only when results leave the polling unit. More infractions are committed then than infractions committed in a polling unit. So this is critical. Now, this also says, number one, the Senate has not taken into cognizance the needs of the people, the needs of the CSOs, who of course have monitored elections over the past 16 years, politicians who also participate. This also sends a message that the National Assembly is more focused on business as usual, retaining their seats as usual, and they don't want anything to change status quo. So we would categorically say the National Assembly presently supports the mistrust and capitulation our results go through before it gets to collation center.
All right, Mr. Ehilebo, let's come to you now and get your own thoughts as well, especially regarding what the legal steps are. Where are we? First of all, your understanding of our current position with regards to the electoral reforms and what the typical steps should be for us to be able to actualize the desires of the majority of Nigerians.
Well, what I see in effect is somewhat of an abortion of the evolution of our electoral cycle. I say this because there is a historical background to this evolution and where we are now. I mean, it starts from the year Yar'Adua was sworn in, the elections that brought him in, and by his own admission, are deeply flawed. And due to character of the kind of leader we now see that he was, Yar'Adua commissioned a very respected, eminent jurist, Justice Uwais, to review our electoral processes and make recommendations. Now, such recommendations are far and wide and far-reaching, and implementing them, of course, had to go through National Assembly deliberations. The Electoral Act was amended and a few revisions made. And then you had President Jonathan, who was committed to developing and enriching our democratic process. He passed some of these recommendations from Uwais, from Justice Uwais. He sort of tried to implement them. That's when you had the 2015 election, you had Bivas. In fact, he went as far as, I remember very clearly in 2015 on the day of election, news reporters and news crews were at his polling unit. And the president at the time, three or four times, could not be captured by the Bivas machine. But he still expressed a great sense of statesmanship by saying that this is a new technology, let's give it, even though I, as the president, it did not work for me, but I still have belief in it. And the 2015 election was adjudged one of those elections that delivered the intention of the Nigerian people to have a change in government. And that's why you saw the APC government. But what we then had was Muhammadu Buhari refusing, during the first tenure of his term, to sign into law the amended Electoral Act. However, second term, 2022, had no issues, and there were a lot of remarkable innovations. However, again, with the narrative in mind, historical narrative, when the Bivas, and this is how each National Assembly year, the 8th, the 9th, and now the 10th National Assembly, has had to live up to the expectation of being an evolving door for our laws, upgrading it to suit the dysfunctionalities that are found in when it becomes operational. So, for instance, in 2015, Bivas, all the way to the Supreme Court said Bivas was not instituted, was not put in law. By the 2022 amendment, it was put into the Electoral Act. But then it went to court, and the court says, look, the discretion was left to INEC to decide whether it was going to use electronic collation or manual collation. And INEC came to court and said, yes, all we wanted was we preferred the manual collation, and that's what it became. However, in 2023, after the election, we still had these issues in court. And, again, the need to evolve our electronic collation and transmission system also arose from the violence we saw. If you people remember the second tenure of Yahya Bello, there was a lot of violence in Kogi and Bayelsa. One person, and maybe he's no longer, but he's so rest in peace, is our friend, his Kunle's friend as well, Ario, Daria Atoye. He was the one person that went to the National Assembly and started protesting that, look, we needed to amend this thing before the 2023 election. Now, we see that in the House, electronic transmission, which was the issue in 2023, was now made mandatory. However, let's not just dwell on just the electronic transmission, which we are arguing today. There are other things that ought to have been amended, but you see the Senate has removed the punishments for vote buying and vote selling, and has now made it more logistically challenging for INEC by reducing before it was 360, and I think they reduced it to 180 or so, 160 days to an election cycle. So we want to ask this question: how responsive is our National Assembly to the yearnings of the average Nigerian? you know, the day the Nigerian starts to lose, and in fact, it is very clear from the data, when you look at the number of people who go out to actually vote on general election day, the statistics says that, I mean, as of 2023, we had about 23 to 24% turnout of a people that are about 100 million. And then you now see the median age of those that are eligible to vote. You have at least 100 million people who are eligible to vote. But out of that number, only about 20-something million come out to decide. For 300 million people or so, 250, 300 million people, only 25 or 30 million people come out to make that decision on where their leadership, at least at the presidential level. And this is because there is a lack of faith, a lack of trust in the process that produces leadership. Now, we all know democracy in practice is a form that if you perform, in another 4 years, there's a referendum. The people decide, oh, this guy has performed well, let's keep him in power. In the US, you see senators that have been there for, what, upwards of 20 years? Okay. Because there are people who trust that every aspiration they have, these senators, these House of Rep members, they embody it and make sure that anytime they are casting their vote or anything is being done in National Assembly, they stand up for it. Let me ask a question today.
Yeah. I need you to...
Let me come back. We're talking about the electoral reform, and I want to tie this back to what we may end up seeing. There was a controversy about our tax law that was signed into law and operational on the 1st of January. There are controversies that certain aspects of this law were forged, and it was raised by the House of Representatives member from Sokoto State, Dasuki, Honorable Dasuki. Eventually, the House came out to say, yes, there were certain misrepresentations in the final gazetted copy. That's not what we passed. That controversy has not been resolved today. We have not seen people, there are no consequences for it. So it means that tomorrow anybody can wake up, even this particular act, and that's why I'm drawing reference to this particular Electoral Act amendment, that we might find out that the House passes something. And I think that is why those senators came out to say, this is what we passed. Before, by the time it is being gazetted, there's a different thing on that act. So I think we must take lessons from...
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Anthony. I'd like to bring Kunle Lawal into the conversation. Kunle, Anthony just took us back memory lane since 1999 and how we've fared in dipped in our democratic culture, as it were. Since the last elections in 2023, and you know, with the town halls that took place, the consultation and everything, the National Assembly and also INEC have been pushing for reforms. Would you say you're satisfied with what they've come up with after 2+ years? And since the last general elections, do you see it as a move in the right direction? Are we making progress? Are we still pushing forward?
My best review, the 10th Assembly just sent Nigeria back into Jurassic Park. And I don't mean this in like, there are lots of discrepancies with the Electoral Act. There are many parts of it that need to be revisited or engaged generally. The Electoral Act has weak internal democracy provisions. Party primaries are generally regulated, but enforcement is weak. That's why you have multiple primaries in different places at a particular point in time. There's excessive litigation. It is the clear belief that any time that there has to be litigation.
Okay. Are you there? All right, seems your network isn't that stable. Hopefully you can join us again. But before we go on a break very shortly, let me ask you one more time, Mr. Anthony. I mean, right now, INEC is saying that they must now publish election notices 180 days before polls. Before it used to be 360 days. What do you make out of this one? Do you think it would enable INEC to carry out the election with the right timeline? Or, because right now we already see INEC saying that they need to quickly start because they are ready to go. So what's your take on the reduction of the number of days from 360 to 180?
Well, I may not understand the rationale behind the decision of the Senate, particularly using the time frame for notices for election and also the conduct of elections. I would think that because of the logistics nightmares involved, INEC is giving enough time. Nigeria has 36 states plus the FCT. The logistics around moving materials, printing. You know how we have 109 senatorial seats and about 300 and something National Assembly seats at the House of Rep. INEC conducts all these elections, state assemblies, and has huge logistical challenges in printing ballot paper result sheets to reflect the number of candidates. That's why INEC needs enough time to get in all those that are contesting for elections, and also the people who have enough time to interrogate the substance of those that would speak for them. For instance, see what we are going through now in the hands of these senators and everything. Because some of these guys, before you know what's happening, they're already on the ballot. And people do not seemingly have choices when it comes to who to vote for. My deep hope is that the time INEC has now, and knowing that their time has shortened, they will do everything possible not to take us back to the days when, and you know, the days when we used to have election materials get to election venues at 3 p.m., 5 p.m. But sometimes some areas or local governments would not have, a whole local government would not have election materials, or when they have election materials, they are incomplete because the logistics of it all has been cramped very tight. So we would hope that with the notice that has come out of the National Assembly as to its intention to reduce from 360 to 180, INEC needs to now step up. Of course, there will be budgeting concerns that we do not expect a budget release that will cater to 180 days or 360 days. We expect that, however it is, whatever logistical challenge they have, they are now aware that this is what is coming from the National Assembly. They have two options: either they start anticipating it, or they go back through their connections with the National Assembly, especially the executive, to say, please, can we put some pressure on the National Assembly to, give us some leeway, assuming that the president is even going to sign these amendments into law. That again is another phase of and we're not just talking that it should be put into the law. It's also, will the president willingly?
Okay. Seems to be a network day. We're back again on Friday.
We seem to be having some connection glitches with our guests, but we'll go on a quick break, and when we return, we'll attempt to reestablish connection with them. So stay with us.
Welcome back. We're still taking a look at the controversial, it's now controversial, electoral bill. Something that many have said should have just been passed like every other normal bill that we've seen in different countries, even here in Nigeria years ago, where bills are passed and nobody makes a statement out of it. But this one seems to be very controversial because of the back and forth, especially bordering on Section 60, subsection 3, where many have asked for the e-transmission of election results real time. But here we are, there's a difference between transfer and transmission, and if it's going to be real time. Our guest, definitely, we do have Executive Director, Electoral College, Mr. Kunle Lawal, who's joining us. And not forgetting to, we also have Mr. Anthony Ehilebo, who is a lawyer and a politician, also joining us as well. We're looking into this, but my question is, so that we do not waste so much time on the grandiose explanation of things, do we see a separation of power, or rather differences even within the National Assembly? Because it's starting to look like the people in the National Assembly, in quotes, senators who are representing Nigerians, who seem not to agree with something and the others just want to go with it. Is there a difference? Can you tell? Let me start with you, Mr. Kunle.
For me, the 10th Assembly is the most, I don't know what word to use for it. I'd rather say disjointed in best ways possible. Really disjointed, really uncoordinated. And there seems to be a poor separation of powers. Now, I'm going to explain from between the executive and the legislative. There seems to be some legislators that are more sworn to the president, and they are sworn to the people of Nigeria. And then there are some, in opposition who don't seem to share the same views. It's highly irregular, and I've been following bills in Nigeria for a while. Highly irregular. So much difference between a gazetted bill, a bill that was passed, and then the bill that was signed by the president. This has occurred in the space of this year already has occurred twice. Well, it's looking like it's going to occur twice. And when you come back to electoral reforms and see that this is quite a delicate matter, this involves how we get into power, we translate power, how people get into offices, how this is done. I thought there would be more attention paid to this. But it seems right now what is split within the House is those who are trying to, and that's how I'm reading this electoral bill, those who are trying to retain the old way of doing things so that they can retain the old way of playing the game or way of retaining their offices. And those who are more thinking, I don't want to use the word progressive, more forward thinking and more trying to assume or trying to show things could be better. One of the key things which nobody's even talking about for me is first, which are big borders for me, is our poor regulation around campaign finance, which nobody wants to talk about, weak internal party democracy positions, because then our over-reliance on manual process. Now, I even believe more than anything that some of the biggest problems in Nigeria is weak voter education. And INEC seems to play around the word civic education and not actually do anything around civic education. Laws around electoral offenses are weak, as in no strong enforcement mechanisms. Electoral offenses are, how would I put it, defined, but rarely punished. And I've always been in support of an independent electoral offenses commission, because I don't understand how in a democracy, or how in any democracy, our entire legal system is burdened by deciding elections. I believe, and I think I can say this categorically, if a court has to decide elections in a country, then the entire process is flawed.
Thank you, Kunle. I would like to bring Anthony back into the conversation. Now, Anthony, Kunle was talking about penalties and punishment for electoral offences. Well, in this reforms, as part of the reforms, the National Assembly is proposing increasing vote buying offences sharply from what used to be 500,000 naira penalty to upwards of 5 million naira. How much of a deterrent will that be, and do you think it will be effective in stopping people from vote buying?
Our National Assembly has to wake up, has to take the cue from other legislative houses across the more modern world. After the January, I think it was 2023 or so, when the march on the Pentagon happened, the U.S. Congress had hearings to determine the cause and to also put recommendations to forestall such events ever happening again. Now, we've had electoral malfeasance reported. We've had people jailed, but it still hasn't curtailed the several malfeasances we see during election. Let me give you an example. in Edo State, even though the courts have announced a different person as governor all the way to the Supreme Court, there is a proven case of electoral malfeasance, which we discovered that one person had signed the signatures for 18 local government returning officers. And this has been proven all the way, getting evidence, expert evidence from all the way from South Africa and sent to ICPC, since that is the prosecutorial body meant to deal with people who are bureaucratic staff of the federal government or the national government, INEC particularly, to deal with malfeasance within that context. I don't think till today, and I think it was TAP Initiative that sent that report to ICPC. I don't know if we've had any prosecutions or consequential management of electoral malfeasance. However, there's some bright sparks. I think a year or so ago, we heard of the wreck, I think in Anambra, in Akwa Ibom, who was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Now, I feel a lot of this needs to happen across board. If you participate in electoral malfeasance, whether as an INEC staff, whether as an ad hoc staff, which is an NYC, or NYC news, who are engaged in election operations, and really to the heart of the matter. Now, if we don't see consequences for these actions, how then can we curb it? How then can we say, even as a deterrent to people who commit it in the future, that if you do this, there must be consequences, and these consequences are relentless. So the consequences have to be relentless. It has to be, because there's nothing as important as protecting the fabric of our democracy, because therein lies the progress of the country. If we can, because a lot of people have said that the interregnums we had from the military have put Nigeria where they are today. However, the consistency of our democracy depends on the public perception of it being democratic in practice, not where we know that the courts are taking decisions on who, like Kunle said, where the courts are now the arbiters of who gets to what office. Then it's an anomaly. It's no longer democracy. You now have something totally, a hybrid of democracy that we are not yet able to define or able to say this is what. So I think the National Assembly, I don't know how late in the day it is for them, must rise up and give Nigerians confidence that, and again, you see, that confidence they are going to give Nigerians can be rewarded within the next 1 year at the polls. So Nigerians will say, this National Assembly has, but I mean, we're talking about a National Assembly that has allowed several borrowings without questioning. You're talking about a National Assembly that has the tax law, what do you call it, floodgate or whatever it is. You have a whole issue of malfeasance with the passage of our laws. Gazetted laws are not the same thing as what was passed by the National Assembly. A conundrum that we are yet to get out of. We do not feel, as Nigeria, I personally do not feel that Nigerians have confidence in their National Assembly anymore, because you have several instances of padded budgets. This year alone, budget has identified over 4,000 illegally inserted items into the 2026 budget. We had issues of the non-performance of the 2024-2025 budget, and control and management and questioning rests with the National Assembly. Unfortunately, this is a National Assembly that stands on the mandate of the president. When he goes there, they are playing a band and they play on your mandate, and all of them are seen to be chanting that. Does that give you the confidence that this is a National Assembly which is meant? Look, the primary role of the National Assembly as the third arm of government, the executive, the judiciary, and the National Assembly, is that it is meant to be a check on the executive. It is meant to pass the budget the executive spends without it saying you can spend. In fact, the passage of the budget itself is a law. That's why the budget is passed as an act. So if the executive goes out of spending on the budget, then there is a criminal and impeachable offense. Malam El Rufai, the former governor of of Kaduna State says that 100 billion has been withdrawn from the account by the president within the last 15 months that he can account for. That is 1.5 trillion withdrawn without the National Assembly passing that as an expenditure. What has been done? Before we even come to even saying the electoral reforms that we need, are we sure the president is going to pass it?
These are questions worth pondering on. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us to discuss the reforms, the electoral reforms. Nigerians are watching. I don't think that we've ever been as involved as we are. I don't think we've seen this much interest and involvement from Nigerians in such a long time.
But let's hope it translates to results and also voter turnout on the day, because we don't get excited about numbers of PVCs collected anymore or registered voters. We would know the results on the day of the election.
When these electoral reforms pull through, it will directly impact all of that. We'll see more people
positively,
confident
hopefully.
about their votes. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen.
Thank you
so much.